teaching physical sciences grade 10 to 12, but we're focusing specifically on assessment in sciences, aren't we, Amber?
Yes.
Hello, Amber. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
You look a little scared there.
I am very nervous.
Now, Amber, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a physical science educator. I've been teaching for about 12 years now. I've taught several countries. I've taught in England, I've taught in Canada, Tanzania, and now in South Africa for the last 6 years. I've been teaching mostly grade 11s and 12s lately. Also life sciences. I finished a master's in education, particularly in assessment and quality assurance last year.
What is a master's?
A degree, a master's degree.
Okay.
That you do after honors degree in education.
Okay, so if someone wanted to study further, they would have their bachelor degree, and then they would study their honors, and then they would study their master's.
Yes, and then a PhD, and then that puts you on the top of your SACWA qualifications as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your master's in?
It was in the relationship between teacher characteristics, such as teacher qualifications and classroom practices, and how they relate to learner achievement.
Okay, so basically who the teacher is versus how well the child is doing.
Yes.
Yes.
In a way, yeah.
Okay. Well, in basic terms.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was far more complicated than just that. Yes. Okay, and then we are joined by Dylan behind the buttons. Thank you, Dylan, for joining us. And remember that if you want to join the conversation, please use the hashtag VTScience. And Dylan will be watching our Twitter feed, and he'll let us know if any of you have something good to add or something to ask us, really. Now, usually, Amber, not usually, although it is usually, we've been reading this book, or I've been reading this book called Teach Like a Champion. And what's nice about this book is it has 49 actionable steps that people can take when they're teaching that will make them a more effective teacher. Anyone who's been watching the webinars knows that I don't necessarily agree with all of the steps that are in the book, but I bring them to the audience for them to decide and also throw them out to our guests. And today's, I think, is quite controversial. It says the shortest path. So the technique is called the shortest path, and they quote Occam's razor, where it says, all other things being equal, the simplest explanation or strategy is the best. And I know in that they're saying that they're comparing it to teaching styles, and they're saying that if every teaching style has exactly the same output, then the shortest one is the one that you should always use. And I'm not sure I agree. In fact, I don't agree at all. What are your thoughts?
I don't think so either, because every cohort, every class of learners that you have is diverse. And so you have to use multiple learning strategies and multiple teaching strategies in order to reach all of those extremes within your classroom.
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it from the class's point of view. I had thought of it from a teaching perspective. But of course, if you're teaching two physical science classes, and the one's high functioning and the one's average, two different strategies would work better with each class.
Yeah. And I think you, as a teacher, you figure out what works with each class. So if you have one highly academic class that they're quite intrinsically motivated, then giving them 10 minutes at the end of the lesson to go and do extension work is very valuable. Whereas if you have another class that's not at that academic level, or that you have that active learner,
yes,
then you would want to engage them in more group activities and not so much independent work.
Okay,
so I think
you've used a lot of really big words there. So I'm going to just make sure I understand you. You're saying that with a class that is more gifted at science or more gifted with doing schoolwork, so they're getting higher marks, they have a better motivation within themselves to do extension work, so more difficult work at the end of the lesson.
Yeah, I don't think it's always mark related though, because like my guardian child that we have at home, she's very not the strongest academic, and she speaks English as a third language. So she's very intrinsically motivated. She wants to do well. She wants to improve. And so whether a learner wants to improve from 20% or they want to improve from 80%, it has to at some point come from within, that desire. So if you have those kids that have that internal, intrinsic desire,
yes,
then you can give them time to do 10 minutes of classwork, and then they're quite happy to do it and take advantage of the fact that you're in there, so they can raise their hand and call you over, and you can help them with something tiny that they've been stuck on, which may inhibit them if they were at home.
So another big word, inhibit. What do you mean?
Slow them down. Make their work take longer, or perhaps they would just get discouraged. So it's an easy hurdle for them to overcome if they have just a little bit of guidance. But if they're at home all by themselves in their room, and they don't have someone that they can ask, then sometimes they'll just give up, pack the book away, and say, "Ugh, well, we didn't understand, so we'll just sort it out tomorrow."
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Dylan, yes.
Can I ask a quick question? Because I agree that your sort of teaching style, teaching strategy should differ with every learner, depending on that learner's particular strengths and weaknesses. But I think really two questions. What are some of the signs, what are some of the pointers that determine or help you as a teacher determine sort of what kind of learner or learners you're dealing with? And secondly, practically speaking, you have a class of 45. How far can you push that? How far can you take this individualized instruction?
I think it depends how much energy you have and what kind of resources you have access to. I've taught in schools where I had electricity sometimes, and there was one photocopy machine. We didn't have any textbooks, and I had very little chemicals. But I had a lovely environment that I could take the kids outside to. We could go to local factories. We went to the recycling plants. We did all of these things that applied to what we were doing in the classroom, and it really engages them and makes it real. Whereas if you sit in a highly resourced school, then it's quite easy for you, but you still have to have a lot of energy to go into that chemical cupboard and pull the things out. So it's just one way or the other. You have to gear it to your target audience and use the resources available to you.
Okay. So we went from talking about a teaching method being the shortest one to all over the place, recycling plants and everything.
Yes, that's how I teach.
Now, this isn't really the focus of today's discussion. Today's discussion is about assessment particularly. What is assessment?
I think assessment, in a nutshell, is a way for us to track and measure how learners are performing and how they're dealing with the material that we've taught them or prior learning, so that we can target strengths and weaknesses and then build on those weaknesses so that we can have the learners achieving their best.
Okay, so it's a measuring tool.
Yes, I think so.
Are there different types of assessment?
Yes. I think there's two main umbrellas of assessment, and I usually talk a lot with my hands, so it's
You're
kind of a little
to
restrictive
talk with your hands.
I'm afraid to hit the microphone.
It will recover. You can talk with your hands.
But yeah, so there's a general umbrella for assessment, which I think encompasses or covers formative assessment and summative assessment, and then
okay, so formative is everything that's not for marks, and summative is everything that is for marks.
No, I disagree. That's quite a common misconception, though. I have asked a few teachers recently what they had learned in their studies and over the years how their definitions of formative and summative assessment have changed. And they gave me the definitions that you gave me.
So
and
tell me why I'm wrong.
I was quite confused, so I called a professor at the University of Pretoria, a good friend of mine, and asked her, does she agree with my definition, or have I just fabricated this from thin air?
So
she
made
said,
it up.
I think I may have made it up a little bit, but she did agree. So on some level, she seems to agree with me that teachers should be taught that formative assessment is all of the assessments that we use in order to guide how we teach and whether we reteach. So it informs how we're running things in the classroom. So if I give an assessment, for example, and every learner in my class underperforms,
yes,
then it tells me something. It tells me that there's something wrong with my assessment, or there's something wrong with how I've taught the work. And then it needs to be remedied. So I either have to go back.
Surely it tells us that there's something wrong with the class and not something wrong with the teaching. You can't laugh at me.
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, it could sometimes be the class, which is the nice thing if you're teaching two groups of learners the same grade. Then you can compare, or if there's multiple teachers teaching those learners, then it also gives you some guidelines, but you can look at their answers and then you can see if there's gaps in prior learning or
yes,
what there is. So then you have to think up ways on how, well, I always like to think up ways to suggest to the learners how they can improve. So some of them, maybe they need to do more practice questions out of a study guide, and other ones maybe just need to plain old study. And then some of them might need extra lessons, or they can pair up with a partner in the class that's doing slightly better, even on the same level, to go through the work and rehash it. But I think as an educator, if everybody's doing poorly, then whether it's your fault or their fault or the assessment, it's your responsibility to go back and recover that and fix it, because especially in physical sciences, when grade 10, 11, and 12 work is examinable at the end of it all, it's very, it's a huge disservice to not remedy something that should have been learnt in grade 10, regardless of whether you were their teacher or not.
Yes, Dylan.
I laugh not because it was a silly question, but because I think it's the default position of so many of us. The whole class failed the test, so they're stupid, they didn't study. And I remember right in the beginning of my teaching career, my head of department said, that may be, but that's not where you start. That must be the bottom of your checklist in terms of trying to figure out why there's underperformance. And exactly what you said, I think there are many things that are above the learners didn't study in the checklist. How did I teach? Was my teaching good enough, clear enough? How did I assess? Was the assessment tool that I was using broken? And I think for so many teachers, that's a real mind shift.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That actually I'm the adult in the room. I've got to take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And if learners are underperforming, well, let me be the big boy or girl and start looking at myself first.
Yeah. Okay.
I wonder what you think about that.
No, and I think context plays a role in it too, because it might be that you taught it the same way you did the year before, and the year before they coped with it just fine. But if there's construction going on outside your window, or there's been some event in the community, then those kids haven't focused the way they normally would. And so then you do have to go back and reteach it anyway, and maybe you need to use some different strategies that are going to grab their attention just a little bit more than the previous year's group needed.
Yes, like the Soccer World Cup coming up and trying to teach during that.
Yes.
Maybe you need to pay more attention to different, I don't know.
No, I think so. And if it's a different time of year, or it's a particularly cold week or particularly hot, then sometimes, or if it's before matric farewell or all of these silly things that happen, non-academic things, then you have to take that into consideration. So the CAPs might say a lot X number of hours, but you might have to put in a few more.
So formative assessment informs us of how they're learning and how we're teaching.
Yes.
Okay, and then the summative assessment is?
It's usually a culminating activity, which I know is another big word. I have a tendency to use those. But it's like a closing activity. So if you finish a chapter, you finish a module, or you finish a year or a term, then you would have an exam or test or some project to give an overall
I'm going to
result.
Draw a little something here. So here we are during, give me a section in physical sciences. We're teaching. What are we teaching?
Mechanics.
We're teaching, and at the end, we've got this little assessment over here, or big assessment, and this would be the summative. Right? But over here, and over here, and over here, we would have our formative, which is informing how our teaching practice is going and how their learning is going.
That's what some people think.
Okay.
I disagree.
Yes.
I believe that all of these are formative, definitely, and this is also a formative. So in my personal opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree, that your summative, even if it's an end of, say, grade 10 or grade 11 end of year exam, then you can still take that and analyze it and give feedback to the learners. And it's really easy if you have them for the 3 years because it was your paper.
Okay.
But even if you didn't always have them, the first thing you should be doing in January is assessing what they know already, or at the beginning of every chapter, every topic that you do. So then what I would do is I would take that end of grade 10 summative and now turn it into a formative and say, okay, this is the prior learning that you need to have for grade 11. Let's see where your shortfalls were in grade 10, and then we need to think of ways to make up for that. So after school lessons or Friday afternoon lessons, Saturday school, something like that.
Yeah.
And then if it's a whole group of learners, then as a school, time should be allocated for that. If it's a small handful of learners, then sometimes it can be up to those learners to find a classmate or a tutor.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. That at the end of grade 10, we write an exam. New teacher in grade 11 doesn't look back at that exam. Surely that exam then would be a summative one because it's not being used to inform the practice of the grade 11 teacher. So the grade 11 teacher is not using it as a formative assessment.
Okay, so then in that context, then it could be a summative if it's having no feedback.
Okay, so this is where my point is going. If you're not using end of grade 10 exam to inform your grade 11 teacher on how to teach, where are the pitfalls, surely that grade 10 exam is a waste of time.
I don't think it's a waste of time if it's set properly. Sometimes teachers set exams, often teachers set exams, and they don't follow the weightings within the caps, or they might have left out chapters here or there because maybe a teacher went on maternity leave or broke their leg and a new one's come in and there's gaps in learning.
Okay.
And then even if you were to use it, it wouldn't be a clear-cut formative assessment anyway. You would need some sort of other benchmark. I think that's why a lot of schools like to benchmark their learners. And I think
benchmark, just explain a benchmark quickly.
Okay, so benchmark tests, you can give them at any time, but a teacher can also set them. And it's what you expect from your learners to know before starting that next section. So if the next section is a chapter, then you would go back and you would look, what should they have learnt for matter and materials in grade 10 before I go and do the grade 11 content on matter and materials.
Okay.
And it can be very simple. You can just take a grade 10 test if you think the nature of the test is good, and give it to them and you can see. And then the learners, I always tell my kids, you should know this, this, and this. I give them a checklist and tell them what they should know. And then if you don't know this, you must sort it out. And how they sort it out, sometimes they come to me and say, do you have a textbook from grade 10 that I can borrow, and an answer book, or someone's notes from last year, Or do you know of a tutor? Can you sit with me on Thursday after school? So I kind of put the ball in their court and make it their responsibility as well, because at senior college, the learners have to start taking some responsibility for their own learning.
Yeah. Okay. We need to move on to what page 10 of the CAPS document says, not because we need to move on, but because it links up very nicely to what you've just said, which is it shows the different content they need to know for the different sections. Now, in our previous conversations before the show, we've been talking a lot about the CAPS document and how few teachers you've run into who are actually using their documents in the classroom.
I don't know of that many teachers that are actually using their documents in their classrooms. Most teachers have the CAPS document, and it's in a nice file, and it's in their cupboard, and it looks beautiful, and it has dividers, but I don't know that they're using them to the full potential that they could be.
I know that I didn't know about the section at the back, which we're going to move on to next, until you pointed it out to me, and it's a fantastic section on assessment.
Yeah, I think the CAPS have been designed in such a way that it takes a lot of time away from the teachers for planning, and it does a lot of the work for us so that we can do the important parts, which is less paperwork and more classroom teaching. So the nice thing about page 10 of the CAPS is that it outlines the 6 topics that are covered in physical science, and then it breaks them down by grade. So you have your matter and materials, and we can choose, mechanics starts with. So it tells what needs to be covered in grade 10 mechanics, and the hours allocated, and then grade 11 mechanics. So you can see there's 27 hours allocated to that, and then I can't see that far. Grade 12 mechanics, 28 hours. So then when I start teaching my grade 12s, then I know that they've already been introduced to Newton's laws and application of Newton's laws. So when I recap that before I go any further, I can tell by the looks on their faces or the shaking of the heads or the nodding whether they have covered it previously or not. And then we can always give those formative mini tests or question and answer type activities where we can be a little bit sure of what they know and what they don't.
So it's very useful to see what they should know, and you can use that to assess their knowledge at the beginning of grade 12 mechanics. Have they got the grade 11 mechanics and grade 10 mechanics knowledge?
Yes, and then I also use it like a little checklist. So I retype it for the kids with more detail, and I put in the subtopics, and then I put little open bullets, and then they tick it off as we cover it, and I refer to it as much as I can, because when they go to university and the lecturers go and put the course outlines on the website, I would like them to actually know what it is and how to use it. So then when it comes to tests and exams in university, they know, there must be some list somewhere of the content of what we need to know. So it shouldn't ever be the case where a child goes home and says, I have a physical science test next week and I'm not quite sure what it's on. And the teacher said it's everything we've done this chapter. And so it shouldn't be the case of where you take page 56 to 78 of your textbook anymore. It should be where they take the checklist and they make sure that they've covered all of those things. And the teacher should be doing that with the kids, or at least independently, because not every textbook has everything that needs to be in it, and sometimes they have extra stuff that's really nice to cover but not necessary to examine.
I'm going to stop you there with this conversation, because I know next week we're talking quite a lot about planning in physical sciences. So we'll pick it up again next week. And let's move to page 143. So it's right at the back of the CAPS document. And I see you brought your CAPS document here.
Yes, my very ugly CAPS document.
And then we're going to scroll through the first few pages. And just to show that it does say quite a bit about, it gives quite clear guidelines about what is assessment in the classroom, and then more specifically how to assess in the physical sciences classroom. And then I think on the second page it starts talking, well, page 144, starts talking about the weightings that, and there we go. This scared me quite a bit. For grade 10 and 11, 25%, including a mid-year examination, will be for the formal school-based assessment, but the end-of-year examination is 75%. The same for grade 12, except it's an external examination for 75%. It almost feels like the 25% doesn't mean much. All of those tests and the marking and everything, it makes it feel pointless.
No, I think it's allowing the teachers and the learners to gauge where they are, and they have to have a target, an idea of where they want to be, and all of those portfolio tasks help to give them an idea of their grasping the material.
So we're going back to
the way they
the definition of formative again, where it's assessments that show how we're learning and how we're teaching. Are we learning enough and are we teaching enough?
Yeah, because I always tell my learners, if you have a standardized test and you make a mistake and you really wanted 70% and you only got 50%, then you learn from that mistake and you see where you've gone wrong and how you can improve. And then it only counts for 2% of your final mark or something like that. So it's not a train wreck if you've messed it up. Just learn from it and then go and redo those topics. And then when it comes to July exams or mid-year exams, then you have another chance to do it again. Okay. And then you have another chance to do it again at the final exam. And the nice thing about physical science, or one of the detrimental things about physical science, is there's grade 10 examined work on the final exams, and there's grade 11 examined work. So I tell the grade 10s and 11s, this is going to be on your matric exam. So learn it right now, and you get a good mark on your standardized test. You'll know it well for your mid-year exam. You'll know it well for the final exam. It's going to be on your grade 11 exams. It's going to be on your grade 12 exams. So just plop it in your long-term memory, and then it's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we scroll a little further down? And we see that we start talking about cognitive levels. And there are 4 cognitive levels in physical sciences. There's recall, comprehension, analysis, application, evaluation, and synthesis. And they've got the different weightings they need to be in the 2 papers, chemistry and physics. Yes. Do you want to talk? No, I think you want to take us further to 148, don't you?
I think so, 148.
Where it goes into more detail.
Yeah, so then that's where your end-of-year exams are, and it breaks it down into your paper 1 topics.
Okay.
Just a little bit down from there. So there we go. So paper 1 topics, so you can see it breaks it into our 3 physics topics, and then it tells us the amount of marks allocated in a 150-mark paper. Then the time allocation is 2 hours. And then it goes and specifies exactly the percentages for each of the cognitive levels. So it's quite nice if you can use those weightings in a design grid, which I think we're going to talk about shortly.
Yes.
In order to set your papers according to these requirements. And if your papers are set in such a way, or if you're writing cluster papers that have been set in such a way, then it is beneficial to allow yourself and your learners to compare themselves across different schools, across different districts, if the papers are being set in the same way. And your averages should always end up being quite nice if you've set them according to these weightings.
Now, when I was studying teaching, they didn't teach us how to... I loved my course, and I'm not saying anything bad about the people, but they didn't really show us how to set assessment tasks and how to level them and things like that. So talk us through these levels. Talk us through dividing up the paper. What do they mean by 75 marks should be on mechanics?
Okay, so then what you do is you go back to that page 10, and it tells us what's all of the content that should be covered in grade 10 mechanics. So you go through that list, and those are all of the things that you can ask questions on. And you need 75 marks worth for that. So half of your exam needs to be on that mechanics content that you spent only less than 30 hours on. But then you need to split it amongst your cognitive levels as well. So you want to have some knowledge recall questions in there, and you want to have some comprehension questions, and mostly analysis and application, which is easy enough to do for mechanics.
Okay, so the knowledge levels are easy, medium, difficult, and impossible.
No. Well, your level 4 ones are your evaluation and synthesis. So that's your higher cognitive levels. I don't think they're impossible, but they're the ones that we're trying to get our learners onto. So university streamed learners should be operating on those, especially in physical science, because the people that we want as engineers and scientists are people that can think creatively, that can evaluate a problem and find a new solution or an alternative way to do something.
Okay, in maths I used to describe level 4 as the unseen question. Like in English they have the unseen poem, which they would then have to interpret. It's similar in science, where a level 4 question would be something that they hadn't encountered in class, but they had all the skills to answer.
Yes, usually. So a lot of times with your evaluation and synthesis, it can be even things like graphing or creating a table or devise experiment. So the learners might be given an aim, and then they have to go and indicate what are their variables and what kind of controls would they have, and develop a method, and then maybe given some sort of fictitious table of results, draw a graph and draw some sort of conclusions. So it may or may not have been a practical that they've done, or one similar to one that they've done, but they should ultimately have the skills to do those things. And all of the skills are also outlined in the CAPS document towards the end of the sections. I don't know. Let me tell you what page. They are there, and the funny thing about it that I do disagree with is that it says to be taught mostly in grade 12, but I think that skills should be taught all the way through.
So if someone's teaching grade 10, they should read through this list of skills and make sure that they've got it going.
And now I can't find them.
Okay, well, while you're looking...
Find them.
I see that they've also listed, I see it because I've gone through the CAPS document now, they've also listed a whole lot of words that need to be used for the different levels in terms of phrasing a question.
Oh, yes. So your action verbs.
Okay.
So they've outlined the 4 cognitive levels in the CAPS, and they, I say they,
the people who
wrote the CAPS.
Yes. I think that was it.
Yeah, it's landscape orientation, so you just have to rotate it.
There we go.
It's there.
Yes.
So it starts with your level 4 cognitive levels, and that's your evaluation and synthesis.
Yes.
Or I think they've changed the words from Bloom's taxonomy, and they've gone and put in, let's just see.
No, that's not.
Up a little bit more.
No, it's still not it.
What page?
Yes, what page? Come, Amber.
Okay, let me I have a tab there.
I see that you've made quite a few marks on your CAPS document.
It's page 152 of the CAPS. Okay, and then since I have flipped to it, I can look at mine. It's creating and evaluating. So these cognitive levels have come from Bloom's taxonomy, which I think most of us did do when we studied education. And then it specifies what type of skills should be demonstrated. So for creating, they give us keywords like generating, planning, producing, designing, and then some action words. And the action verbs I like to use when I write the question. So you can take a question, and just by changing the action verbs and your expectations of the types of answers that you're going to get, and you can make it into a different cognitive level. So
okay, let me stop you there. So let's just go to level 1. Take me through a question that you can change from a level 1 to a level 3.
Okay, so a remembering one. So that's recognizing, listing, describing. And those typically would be your matching, multiple choice type questions or definitions.
Okay.
So if you had to match definitions, you could have...
would you have Newton's laws?
So you could have Newton's laws in one column, and then you could have a bunch of phrases where the learners would have to select which one is Newton 1, which one is Newton 2, Newton 3, and so forth.
So then take it to level 2, Newton's laws.
Well, then we have action verbs like describe, interpret, contrast, associate. So you could say, give an example of a scenario that would be explained by Newton 1, or describe Newton 1 in your own words. So it's not just provide a definition, it's actually a little bit more understanding of what's happening. And then if we wanted to go on to applying or analyzing,
which is level 3.
So it says solve, examine, modify. So that's where you would have a question that maybe says select which one of Newton's laws you would use to solve this problem. So the select the law is a cognitive level 1, and then the solving the problem using Newton's law, so F net equals mass times acceleration or something like that, then they would have to go in and substitute the work and maybe use a free body diagram to go and build that. So the skill of the free body diagram you could provide for them, and then it's a level 2 cognitive. But if they actually have to draw the free body diagram, then you're putting it onto a creating now, so then it's a level 4. So if you have them draw the cognitive or the free body diagram and solve the problem all on their own, then it's now a level 4 question.
So basically what you're saying is setting an exam and setting all of the questions is a work of art.
A little bit, yes.
It's taking different content and manipulating it so that you're asking all of the cognitive levels.
Yeah.
But sounds
I think
like
it's
quite beautiful.
It's so nice. Well, I love assessment. That's why I'm still studying it. But it's quite nice because you can take a question from a source or from a past paper, and you can use the concept, the knowledge behind it, and then just use your action verbs to adapt it to be your own question that you've now created and can be proud of, to challenge your learners. And what I like to do is start them with mini tests or class tests with maybe cognitive level 1 and 2 questions, and then take that same content and pull them a little bit farther into the cognitive level 3, and then it's like a bicycle with training wheels. And then you slowly take the training wheels off, and then you run behind them holding the seat, and then you let go. And then they keep riding, and you hope they don't crash. That's their matric exam. You really pray they don't crash because you're not there to catch them. But yeah, I think as a teacher, you want to give them the tricycle and then the 2-wheel bike with the training wheels, and then hold the seat and the helmet and make them as safe as you can. And then at some point you have to let go, and they just have to ride that bike, and some of them will fall. But
now you have created a design grid for us. A designed grid. Did you hear that? That we can then share with everyone who's watching, that they can then use when they're setting assessments.
Yes, and
Thank
I
you
think
very much.
It looks a bit complicated, but it's really made in such a way that it's there to make life easier.
I
And
see that we're sitting on the grade 12 physics page, and I see that's great, grade 12 physics. And it's got 4 categories: mechanics, wave, sound and light, electricity and magnetism, and matters and materials. So those are the 4 categories that are in physics papers.
paper 1, for grade 12.
Okay.
Yes.
And then just after that, you've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the cognitive levels.
Yes.
And Dylan, and I see you've got all the verbs there as well.
Yes, I've put all of the action verbs for each of the cognitive levels. So when teachers are setting their papers, you can have that, maybe a printout of it sitting. I always print out a copy and write everything in by hand at the start for my first maybe 40 or 50 marks of the exam. And then I start to plug it in whatever this Google program is. I usually use Microsoft Excel, but then it tallies it all up at the bottom and it throws your totals, your running totals in.
Well, let's move across to the left where it shows the question numbers. The left of the spreadsheet. That's the right, Dylan.
Sorry, the other left.
Yes. And it's got question numbers, and you put question numbers down there, and you've been quite specific where it's gone 1.3.1. And I'm assuming that's because 1.3.1 would have a different cognitive level to 1.3.2.
Yes, and sometimes even within 1.3.1, you can, if it's a 4-mark question, 2 marks of it could end up being a cognitive level 2, and 1 mark a cognitive level 3, and 1 mark a cognitive level 4, which is where it's good to have moderation, because as long as you can justify why it lives in that category, then it should. But everybody will differ a little bit.
Okay,
with
well,
regards to their opinions.
Let's fill in some marks for 1.1 just to demonstrate how this will work. So 1.1, if we go a little bit up so we can see what we're filling in. Your other up, Dylan. Okay, so the first part of mechanics, 1.1, let's say we're putting 2 marks in for the first part. Is that okay?
Sure.
And because it's the first question, we'll be kind and we'll say, yes, put the number
So
2.
they're definitions? Yes, it's a definition.
And it's cognitive level 1, so we're going to go across to the cognitive levels and fill in the same 2 marks. So question 1.1 is only worth 2 marks.
Yes.
But it's that first part of mechanics and it's cognitive level 1.
Okay.
And I think the nice thing, sorry to interrupt, but I think the nice thing to do at the beginning of setting a paper as well is to ask lower cognitive level questions just to give the learners a little bit of confidence and reduce some anxiety. So that's typically why we put the multiple choice and the matching at the beginning and the definitions and they know this stuff. They can do this, and you don't want to hit them with a cognitive level 4 question right off the bat, or they're all going to have panic attacks and give up.
So 1.2, let's put 3 marks in for the second part of mechanics. Let's move it across. And 3 marks for cognitive level 2. And I completely agree with you about not kicking them when they've just started. Okay, so we've entered 2 marks. Let's see what it's done to the bottom, where it tallies up all of the marks. Oh, it's magic. Isn't that beautiful? So in total, we have 5 marks for the section was mechanics. Thank you. And if we go across, we'll see that we have 2 marks for cognitive level 1, 2 marks, and then 3 marks, and in total, 5. A paper of 5 marks.
And you can set up at the very top, it says something total marks or something I've put in at the very top left. Yeah, total marks, and there's a little box. You can change that to whatever you want. So if it's a standardized test and you want it to be an hour test and you want it to be 70 marks, then you just change that to 70, and it does all of your percentages and calculations for you. And if you want
let's go down and see where all the percentages and calculations are. Because if we go quite low down,
I want to do one more.
Okay.
So it's a 5-mark question.
Yes.
Is that how it's working?
Yes.
Okay.
So 1 mark, put my mic on, 1 mark is competent level 1, 2 marks are at level 2, and 2 marks are at level 3.
Yes.
Okay? And obviously that then is reflected in the marking memo that accompanies this exam.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'd go down to where it's been summarized, which we haven't seen yet.
So we've got 10 marks now, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
10 marks, and move a little bit down, and there we go. Ta-da! This spreadsheet makes me very happy because it's tallied up all of the marks, and you can see you don't have to keep track of, okay, I've done so many marks in matters and materials and not enough in magnetism.
Yeah,
It
and
tells
I've
you
taken
automatically.
all of the expected percentages out of the caps, and they differ between the physics and the chemistry papers. So these ones are the specific requirements for grade 12 physics, and then the 200 is the expected total of marks, and that's the one that you change up at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then it tells you your actual marks, so you know how many you still have to go. And then a little bit to the right of that is your content analysis. So for a mid-year exam or a prelim exam, you would want to test on all of the physics content at grade 12. And then those weightings are also specified in the caps on those last few pages, 150-somethings. Yeah, so then it tells you whether you need to, which chapters you want to go.
I think your spreadsheet might be a little bit broken because our marks haven't reflected there.
Oh, no.
But I'm sure you'll fix it straight after the show,
I
won't
will.
you?
I will.
And we are going, you very kindly said you will share this with us, and we are putting it up so people can use it. They would just have to make a copy of it so that,
Marvelous.
yeah, they can
okay.
use it in their own assessment. Okay. Now, we've got 10 minutes left, and there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that was the target graphs that you spoke about.
Yes.
And this has a slightly different twist than just keeping a mark book, doesn't it?
Yes, because the teacher still keeps their mark book, but this puts some of the responsibility in the hands of the learners. And I've had quite positive feedback over the years on it from my learners and from parents. And
So what is the target graph?
okay.
Who draws it? Where do they draw
The
it?
learners draw it. So usually the first day of school, when I give my introduction of who I am and what my classroom expectations are, I give each child a piece of graph paper. Sometimes a real piece of graph paper and sometimes a photocopy of graph paper. It doesn't matter. And then I have them draw their y-axis and their x-axis, which
I
are...
think use black because the green's not coming
showing
out
you
as
so
clearly.
nice. Okay, and this microphone still scares me a little bit. Okay, so then they take their ruler and they use their skills that they've learned, and I use the words y-axis and x-axis because those are expectations that I have for them at FET level. And then I tell them on their y-axis, because I'm now testing prior learning and I'm reinforcing it. It is the first day of school. So I tell them they must write percentage on their y-axis and their units, which is also a skill. And then they must use regular increments and graph all the way up to 100, which is also a good skill. And I tell them, remember, you must start at 0, blah, blah, blah. Bigger.
Make it bigger.
Okay.
Yes.
Then along this side, I tell them they have to write, I can't see what I'm doing with this microphone, assessment tasks. Okay, so they write assessment tasks here, and their first task that I give them might be a mini test. So then they're going to write mini test. Oh, even before that, I'm jumping the gun. I'll tell them, okay, use your mark from the previous year and your goals of what you have for this subject. Take into consideration what you want to do after school, what kind of marks you need, and set yourself a personal target, not a target that your parents have set you, but a target that you, as a learner, want to take responsibility for and you want to achieve. So they might set this target, and let's say it's 85%.
And they draw the line with their ruler
And
across.
they draw the line with the ruler all the way across to the margin of the page, and then they write term 1 target. Okay, and the whole thing I have them write across the top that it is a target graph.
Okay.
Can you see that? Yes. Okay, so it's not meant to be a horrible thing. It's a nice thing. It's targets. So then I give them a week later or whatever, a mini test. Or a benchmark test would be ideal if you have that much energy at the beginning of the year. And they graph the result. And then I usually have them write what it's out of. So they would write 15 out of 15 because they got 100% on it.
Okay.
Okay. So then the context of this graph, I know, and they know that it's a small amount of material. It's maybe cognitive level 1. It's the start of the year, so we're still warming them up. It could be prior learning, whatever.
Okay.
They write it in. Sometimes they write the topic here. So they might write atoms and molecules or something like that. Blah, blah. Then they know what it is. Then we go on and I say, okay, now we'll do a practical activity. And you're going to do it in pairs and then write me a report. So they would graph that and they get this mark. Okay, and maybe that was out of 30. So they write their mark in, and we can see that this is a practical. And they can write it in the bar, they write it here because it's not a real formal graph.
Okay.
Then we carry on, and now they
so
write
basically they do a whole lot of...
standardized test.
Yes.
Or a cycle test. And now it's out of 70 marks, and they got 35.
So they can immediately see that they're starting to fall short of their term 1 goal.
Yeah, so why is this happening? And then that's when I will pull the learners in if I see this decline, because I usually have them keep all of these in a file in alphabetical order, and then I hand them this, and then I give them back the assessment.
Okay,
and then they check.
Sorry, let me check I've got you right. You are keeping these graphs yourself.
Of course.
Okay,
because when mommy and daddy want to come and see me, I have their child's target. Because a child that sets a target of 47% or 65% even is not going to get an 80 in your class, even if mom and dad want them to.
Okay.
So that's when reality is really nice sometimes for the parents, because a lot of parents want their sons and daughters to take physical science and to be an engineer because dad's an engineer, and an architect because mom's an architect. But little Johnny wants to be a fashion designer. So little Johnny's goal is to get 65 or 60% in physical science, and mom and dad can't figure out why he's not getting 80 even though he studies so hard. Well, he's not really studying, he's drawing during that time.
So you keep them, you hand them out with the next assessment that they've got to then graph.
Yeah, so I give them the target graphs, and then as I call their names with their assessments, I give them their assessments. Then I say, check all of your adding up, because I'm not perfect and I make mistakes, so they check their adding up. We go through the memo. They have time to query if there's any discrepancies or problems where I might have given them too many marks or not enough. And then they do this target graph, and then they hand everything back into me as I shout out their names quickly, and we put them all back in my file in alphabetical order.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, Dylan?
Can I suggest an addition to that?
Sure.
If you possibly know the total number of marks, or even if you don't, you make an assumption, right? All the assessments that we're going to do, all the mark-based assessments we're going to do this term add up to 300 marks.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be the scale on the x-axis so that the width of each of the bars is the same as the weight of that particular assessment?
So then you could show that they're more strongly weighted.
Yeah, so that cycle test of yours out of 70 marks is going to be quite a lot wider than the initial benchmarking test of 15 marks that you did.
Definitely. Or maybe even color code them. Yeah. No, that's a good idea.
That's, yes. A very thin one for the 15 out of 15, but a very fat one for the 70.
Yeah. And it's such a nice thing to have these target graphs because it makes my life easy. When it comes time to parent-teacher meetings or report card comments, then I can pull out their target graphs and I can say, Johnny started the year off very well and copes very well with assessments that are on small amounts of work, and he shows potential to get very high achieving marks. However, he struggled on the standardized test, which was on whatever content, just by looking at their target graph, which the kids filled in. And I threaten them with their lives that they mustn't lie on them. And I keep all their assessments anyway, so if it's something really weird, then I can check.
Yes.
And then I can comment that it was a large amount of work, or the nature of the test had higher cognitive levels in it, and that it's definitely something that they would want to revisit or rework through during holidays or give extra attention in preparation for exams.
So they would then use the 35 out of 70 as motivation or guidance on what to study next.
Yes.
So it becomes an internal reflection. They say, well, that's not my strong point. I should redo that one in my studying.
Yes, and it also gives the learners an opportunity to take responsibility too, because they can say, oh, well, I broke up with my girlfriend 2 days before that test and I was really upset, or our family dog was sick, and I won't make that mistake again. I'll be sure to raise my marks.
My dog is healthy.
Yeah, but then you can see how their target won't change. Then what I like to do is our lives are always changing, and you always have the opportunity to set a new path. So I tell the kids at the start of term 2, okay, take out your target graphs and we're going to set a term 2 target. So they go and they use this information. Some of them say, nope, I'm still happy with my term 1 target, and then they just write term 1 and term 2 target. And others say, oh, I know this term is an exam term, or it's a more difficult module, maybe more physics, and I am not so strong at physics, so I'm going to set myself a new target of 70%. And then they go on. And then if they reach that target now with their mid-year exams, then they say, okay, now in term 3, I'm going to set myself this target because now I want to go to university and do a BSc or whatever, and I need a 90 and I'm really quite focused, so I'm going to go for that. So then you see these dips and you see the changes in targets as you go through. And I think it's really advantageous to your high-achieving, high academic ability learners too, because they usually underestimate themselves, or they're so used to the rest of the class going, oh, of course so-and-so is going to do so well on this. So those are the kids that will set themselves a target of 85 when we know they're capable of 92. And then once they start surpassing that 85 or reaching it all the time, then you say, okay, well, let's try for 88. And then it gives them something to push themselves with as well.
How do you find the lower end performers?
No one wants to draw a target at 30. So nobody, even the kid that says that they don't care, they don't want to draw a target at 30. And so they are going to put that target at 50. Okay. And then we eliminate that this is an option, which I think really it is not an option. So then that kid, if they're working down here, it's giving them something to push for. And my goodness, they might reach that, and then it becomes a 55 target. So it's a 3-year course. So why can't you get that kid that was on 30 in grade 10 on a 50 in grade 12? Or maybe they'll realize they're not really meant to be in physical science, because not everyone is meant to take physical science, just like I can't sing. So nobody would... You might hurt my feelings if you say you're not going to sell out a stadium because no one wants to hear you. But they might hit that reality that they don't want to be an engineer. They don't want to do anything physics related.
They want to be a fashion designer.
They want to be a fashion designer. So, let's take subjects that make them happy and will be useful. And then they don't need to worry about this physical science stress.
Well, we have come to the end of our time. Dylan, do you have anything more to add? Yes, join us.
So I just before we ended, I just wanted to perhaps bring back to the fore, not to discuss further, but maybe just to leave with people. One of the things that I really have appreciated about what you've brought in terms of your view of formative and summative assessment. And that's really that even if we initially consider something summative, let's treat it as formative. Let's always be digging through the data to find out what we can do better, what we can improve upon. And I think if we just have that, I don't know, that understanding that assessment is there, and maybe even for learners, that assessment is there not to label, to say, well, you got it, you didn't, you're clever, you're stupid, you're able, you're incapable, but more that assessment is really a way for us to reflect on what is working and what is not working, and not to leave it there, but to try stuff that will hopefully change the not working into working. And maybe just in that way, and even with this graph, just to take some of the pressure off cycle tests. That the cycle test is there not to judge, not to label, but it's there to really give everybody a sense of, what's working, what's not, and the opportunity to change. I really, really thought that was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Amber, for coming in. And we look forward to having you again next week.
Okay, I won't be as nervous. It's not really that scary.
Good, I'm glad. Join us again next week, where we will be talking about planning in physical sciences, and Amber will be with us again. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Uh-huh.